In this video, I'll show you how I painted my Warmaster Titan. Hi everyone, and welcome to another brushstroke painting guide, where this time I'm going to take you through the steps I took for painting this Warmaster Titan from Games Workshop's Adeptus Titanicus range. So this is actually quite a special model for me because it's the first time Games Workshop have very generously invited me to paint one of their pre-release models, so no pressure there then. Oh, and it has to be done on a deadline, so really not quite sure what I got myself in for. But when Games Workshop said did I fancy painting one of their tiny new Titans, I wasn't going to turn it down. But before I begin, I want to say a massive welcome to all of the new subscribers to my channel. There's been a bit of a surge lately and you are all very welcome. I'm grateful for your support, as I am of all the subscribers that have been following me up until this point. If you happen to be watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, then please hit that button now, and don't forget the notification bell to be told whenever I post a new video. Right, let's start some painting. And the first thing I'm going to say is I've never painted a Titan before, not even a tiny one, so my plan is to go with sub-assemblies. I'm thinking start with the skeleton and then add all of the armour panels on second. I might live to regret this, but that's the plan. So first step is going to be base coating all of the skeleton pieces with some graphite from Darkstar Miniatures. As I mentioned in the introduction, I'm on a deadline for this model, so for speed purposes I'm going to airbrush this step. Now you could quite easily do this with a hand brush or even with a rattle can. Just make sure you get a nice clean and even smooth finish across the whole of the model. I'm no expert with airbrushes, so I'm just going to take my time, keep it nice and thin and nice even coverage. Do make sure that you base coat all of the skeleton pieces in this base coat, and don't forget the inside of all the armour panels as well. Okay, so that's looking like a really nice shiny metal skeleton, but it is very plain, so I'm just going to add in some interest by painting in some details now with some bronze from Darkstar Miniatures. I've added a touch of water to help thin the paint down slightly. This helps it just flow smoothly from the brush and will give you a nice clean, smooth finish. I'm not really following any particular method here in terms of which details I'm picking out. I'm just looking for things of interest which will help draw the eye around the model and break up that sea of silver. So just work your way around the model now and make sure that you add interest and detail to all of the skeleton pieces. For the next step, I'm going to carry on picking out more details, but this time with a darker tone of silver. I'm going to go with some steel from Darkstar Miniatures. So my thinking really with this step is just to pick out some of those details like the grooves on the shins here, maybe the gears on the knees, and the interesting pattern on the top of this foot, just to add some extra contrast and depth using this darker tone. Remember to thin your paint with that water just so that the paint is flowing really nice and smoothly, and don't forget, if you don't get full coverage with one coat, it's always better to apply another thin coat than trying to apply it too thickly to start with. As with the last stage, just work your way around the model pieces really, picking out these extra little details. So whilst working around the model pieces, I've noticed these braided hoses or cables, and I thought it'd be nice to paint those in with some Eshen Grey from Games Workshop. As always, a little touch of water just to help that paint move nice and smoothly from the brush, and then just work your way around picking out all of these hoses on the model. I've decided that this missile pod is going to be a bit too difficult to paint when fully assembled, so I'm going to paint that now. It's already been base coated with the graphite, and now I'm going to paint in all the missiles with some Ardennes green from scale 75. If you've never used Scale 75 paints before, then they're just exactly the same as acrylics really. You can thin them down with water to make them go on nice and smooth. They're gel based, which actually means they hold their pigment a lot better. And the really cool thing I like about these is when they dry very, very matte. You should find that the coverage of this is pretty good, but it's always better to apply as thin layers and build up to a solid finish. Okay, so with all those warheads now painted in green, I'm just going to add a final nose cone detail by adding a splash of yellow to each of the tips, and for this I'm going to use Flash Gits Yellow from Games Workshop. It's for this step that I wanted to keep this piece separate really. It's a lot easier to work with when you're not holding the whole model, and you can just get that finer detail and get a sharper edge. For the next step, I'm going to apply a shade wash now to all of the pieces we've painted so far, and for this I'm going to use some Null Oil from Games Workshop. The temptation when shading such a big model is just to get the biggest brush you can and really throw the shade onto it, but actually it's far better if you're more controlled and just deal with the model in smaller areas and work your way around methodically. That way you don't need to disturb any of the shade that you've already done, and I tend to find it works better if you work from top to bottom. That way you don't have too much shade running down the model and getting out of control. Make sure you apply this shade over all the colours that we've painted so far, so that it will really darken it down and bring out the shadows and details. Because we're applying so much shade on such a large area at once, it will take quite a while to dry, so definitely recommend that you leave it a good 30 to 40 minutes and make sure that it is fully dry before moving on to the next step. And that next stage is going to be painting in the plasma coils on the plasma destructors. And for this I'm going to paint in the coils initially with some white ink, and you can get this from art stores, but it's a very quick way of getting a strong white over any colour. For the purpose of this application, you can pretty much use this ink as you would a wash, and I'm applying it neat from the bottle. I'm just letting it settle into all those recesses, which is where we want the brightest area of the light to be anyway. As you would a wash, you're going to need to let this dry fully before moving on to the next step. For this next step, I'm going to apply a glaze over all of those white coils now, and for this I'm going to try and use a paint that I've not used before. It's fluorescent green from Vallejo. So to create my glaze, what I've done is I've thinned this down with a lot of water, so it's now very similar to how a wash would look. But unlike a wash, what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply it very lightly and not let it settle into those recesses, so that it just tints that white and becomes more green. And then over several layers I'll be able to build up the intensity of that green, and hopefully I'll have a realistic and quite vibrant glowing effect. Moving on to the armour panels now, and again for speed purposes I'm just going to use my airbrush, and I'm going to try another paint that I've not tried before because I want to do a metallic purple out of the bottle, and I found this from Deco Art. It's called Purple Pearl, so we're going to give this a go. And straight away the first thing I've noticed is that because this is a craft paint, I've had to add a lot more water to thin this down to be usable. It seems to be going through the airbrush okay. For my first coat I'm getting a lot more metallic fleck than I am the purple colour, but as I add subsequent second coat I am finding that there's more purple coming through and I'm getting quite a strong colour. So all in all I think this is going to work. Well, I have to say I'm quite happy with that result. It's gone on nice and smooth, it's a nice bright shiny finish, and now I'm going to apply an all over wash just to tone that down of some Null Oil from Games Workshop. I was looking for quite a dark finish here, so I applied quite a generous amount of the Null Oil. The trick here really is just to keep it moving and encourage it into all those recesses, and try not to let it pull on any of the flatter or curved areas where you don't want to have those watermarks. As always with these washes, make sure they're fully dry before moving on to the next stage. I did find with doing so many of these armour panels I had a bit of a production line going, so as one wash is drying you're applying it to another panel and so on. Moving on to the other colour for the armour panels now, and because I'm using my airbrush I thought it'd be quite a good idea to try some masking for the first time. So I've applied some Tamiya masking tape to some of the panels just to make some stripes, and now I'm going to apply my second colour, which is Hawthorn Grey from Games Workshop, to paint in all of the white panels. Using a grey primer made it very easy to get a good coverage of the Hawthorn Grey on the solid panels, but over the purple panels I did do a couple of extra layers just to make sure I got a nice solid finish for those stripes. Right then, moment of truth. Have I made a complete disaster of these stripes? Okay. First impressions, that's actually looking quite good. I've had a little bit of bleeding under the tape there. I've since found out a couple of good tips which would have helped prevent that bleeding. So firstly, if I'd used a cocktail stick and helped push the masking tape into those grooves, then that would have created a better seal. And then secondly, I could have sealed the tape by doing a spray of clear medium before I did the Hawthorn Grey. That way any bleeding of that medium would have been completely invisible, and then when I sprayed the Hawthorn Grey there would be nowhere for it to bleed to. For the white armour panels, I'm not going to apply an all-over wash like we did with the purple ones, but instead I'm going to do some recess shades, and I'm going to use two different shades of grey for this. I'm going to use some Celestra Grey and then some Eshin Grey from Games Workshop. Starting off with the Celestra Grey then, and for this I've just thinned it with a touch of water, and I'm just going to run it along all of the edges of the metal trim, just to pick out that detail and add a little bit more definition. Do take your time with this step and try and be as neat as you can, but if you do make any mistakes then just neaten things back up again with some Hawthorn Grey. And then using some thinned down Eshin Grey, I'm going to paint in those deeper grooves and recesses. By thinning down the Eshin Grey you should find that it runs nice and cleanly into those grooves, but if it does make a bit of a mess on the edges then wait for it to dry fully and then just tidy things back up again with some Hawthorn Grey. And now for that bit that everybody loves, painting in the armour trim, and for this I'm going to start off with a base coat of Retributor Armour from Games Workshop. So best advice here really is just do take your time. The temptation is to try and just put the paint on really thick or rush through it, and it won't look good and you'll hate yourself for it. So keep your paint nice and clean and smooth and neaten up as you go and you'll get the job done. Make sure you paint in all the trim on the purple and the white armour panels and on the skeleton pieces as well, because there's actually quite a lot of armour trim on there as well. With the armour trim now base coated, I'm going to apply a wash over all the trim with some Seraphim Sepia from Games Workshop. This step is a lot easier than doing the base coating of the trim, but do take your time again so that you don't flood it, and you're just looking to add that extra definition and shadow to the recesses and all of the rivets. Not wanting to sound like a broken record, but it is important. Do let this wash dry fully before moving on to the next step. Okay, that shade wash has brought out all the detail and added some shadow to the trim now, and now I'm going to brighten it back up and add some shine back to the trim using some classic gold from Darkstar Miniatures. So for this step what you're doing is you're adding a layer to all the areas that you want to be brighter and add some shine to, but leave the darker areas in the recesses and around the rivets. Now you might not notice too much of a colour difference when applying this paint, but the main difference that you will find is it brings a real shine and impact back to your gold. I found the best way of doing the panels was a little production line, and then it's just a case of repeat, repeat, repeat. The end is in sight, just a few more details to do, such as the scrolls on these front panels, and to start off with I'm going to base coat them with some Ushabti bone from Games Workshop. Completely normal process for this. Touch of water to keep things smooth and apply several layers in order to get a nice solid finish. Next, I'll apply a wash to the scrolls of Agrax Earthshade from Games Workshop. And once that wash is completely dry, I'm just going to brighten that back up again by adding a layer of Ushepti bone. It's at this point you can paint in your motto or name for your Titan. I did this using some thinned down Eshin Grey. For the next step, I'm going to add a final edge highlight to all of the gold trim now using some Stormhost Silver from Games Workshop. Now you may find it's a lot easier for you to add all the armor panels to your skeleton before doing this edge highlight, because that way you'll know exactly where the light is going to be catching and where those highlights need to be. And I definitely did that for the majority of the panels, but certainly for these eagle panels I did these separately, just so that I could get the fine detail on the wings, etc. If you'd like to know some more tips and tricks to help improve with your edge highlighting, then please do check out my edge highlighting video, which you can see by clicking the link above. So the more eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that the head that I prepared at the start of this video isn't actually the one that I ended up going with, and I changed my mind partway through and decided to go with this one. Now I didn't paint this on camera, but I did want to talk you through how I painted the eye lenses. So it was very quick and very simple. The head was first base coated with graphite like all the other skeleton pieces, and then for the eye lenses all I did was applied a thinned down wash of Mortarian Green Clear, thinned down with some Lamium Medium. The ratio was about 2 parts medium to 1 part Mortarian Green. And that's all there was to it. So the shape of the eye lens actually pushes the shade to the edges and makes it darker, and then the metallic underneath is what gives it the shine and interest as if it's a real lens. Very simple. That brings us on to the last step now, and that's going to be adding some weathering to the feet and legs. So you can see I've fixed the legs to the base and it's looking pretty cool, and I'm just going to add some weathering now using some rust weathering powder from Forge World. If you've not used weathering powders before, they're basically just powdered pigment that you can use in different ways to create weathering and dirt effects on your models. In this particular case, I've just got an old dry brush and I'm adding a small amount to the brush and rubbing it into the surface of the model just to give a soft, sort of dirty, sandy effect. So I'm using a rust colour because it matches the Mars kind of Martian colour scheme that I've got on my base, but you could quite easily use browns for mud or yellow for desert sand. I prefer to add the powder slowly and to build up to the effect that I'm after, because it's far easier to add a little bit more than it is to try and take it off. Once you're happy that you've got the coverage that you're after, the way to seal it on so that it doesn't rub off whenever you pick up the models is to just have a spray clear varnish and give it a light spraying, and then that will be enough to seal it in. And all that remains now is to finish assembling the model, and my Warmaster Titan is complete. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, then please do click that like button and drop a comment below. If you'd like to see more of these videos, then please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to be told whenever I post another video. So thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.